At least in Canada, I noticed there's a glimmer of light at the end of the pandemic tunnel. After over a year of masking up, sitting down, and staying in, it's difficult to imagine life after this. And what was this exactly? Well, whether you're a strict believer in the actuality of the pandemic itself, or a self-appointed truther, I think both crowds can point to a definite before and after. It's been said time and time again, but before the outbreak, most of us failed to operate on a level beyond our own sense of personal journey. I, for one, did. The world was there, filled with opportunity, and I was caught up in the anxiety of figuring out what I should do with it. This was a world I knew since I was a kid, where historical events of mass death were restricted to history textbooks, and the thoughts of a disruptive global outbreak was the stuff of film. This was a world of stability, of libidinal exchange in both discussion and commerce. And I was in this system, an active participant, ready to sink my teeth in. Life was a series of actionable steps in a functional system. Studying at a cafe was a given, going to the gym, seeing my friends, traveling, ignoring the slight differences in opinion amongst those closest to me. Oh, that last one sure changed after this. What was once a fun novelty to have a risk-filled, contagiously extroverted friend soon became a risk of contagion. The debate of freedom versus security emerged violently in between the signals of Zoom calls and the tiring scenery of one's dining room. Friends grew apart as each drew a line in the sand. Still now, I hear stories of families splitting apart due to whether or not they can agree on the existence of a Clinton-funded pizza basement. Political rage, of course, crescendoed as I was stuck at home, apparently either forced or drawn to watch reel after reel of angered protesters, acts of violence, and underneath it all, a growing sense that the world has been entirely knocked off course. I knew there were people that, under my own perhaps cruelly unsympathetic assessment, were unintelligent and hateful, but nonetheless mostly harmless. Unfortunately, through a blend of governmental incompetence, disinformation, decades of defunding education, and probably an entire library's worth of other sociological reasons, this crowd has found a voice. I've had to ask myself many times the extent to which this voice should be heard, perhaps disoriented by a mixed reaction of far-removed outrage, and inversely the acknowledgement that silencing such voices could easily become a slippery slope of totalitarianism. This right here is perhaps the most common conundrum of weak-willed virtue-signaling liberals like myself. Of course, I didn't spend the entire pandemic inhaling the nauseating fumes of social outrage. I think there was a point sometime during the US election where I resigned myself from any further consumption, if nothing more than to live more healthily. This in itself is an issue. For one, is turning from politics a sign of privilege? That nothing political is adversely affecting you, and so you are perfectly capable of selfishly blinding yourself to the suffering of others. Then again, some would say everything is political, or perhaps would insist that this is so. Do we have a responsibility then to care? And more importantly, do we even have a choice in the matter? I'm not sure. Everything during the pandemic has become noticeably radicalized on a social level. And this makes sense. The world is torn asunder, shaken apart by volatile markets, threats to food production, and a general uncertainty. Being centrist doesn't appear to be appropriate. As Frankl would say, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. However, the pandemic, in a roll-your-eyes cliché sort of way, also slowed things down in my personal life. I spent the first half in the heart of Montreal, an epidemic epicenter, drinking a considerable amount in my apartment and trading apocalyptic hypotheticals with my friends over the phone. Those first few months seemed like one. Everything was on the brink of collapse, and all future plans were rendered comical. There was also a peculiar fun about it, like a snow day on steroids. Before I was debating whether psychology was truly the path for me, and I lacked a considerable amount of motivation to tackle any more classes. I was going through the motions, with nothing to initiate movement, other than the idea that this is what I should do, I guess. Then, all of a sudden, nothing mattered. In sort of a good way. It was liberating, the ability to sleep in, pause, look outside, and just think. But it was also filled with dread, despair, what I can only describe as the mental manifestation of nihilism. The constant refreshing of threads discussing the spread of the virus as well as the uncertainty surrounding the lethality of it made my day-to-day life the habitat of panic and catastrophization. And what happened was the ideal proof for the catastrophizer. I remember reading some article in early January on a virus that can be transmitted for up to 2 weeks before showing any symptoms, and that truly scared me. And then my worst fears actually happened. But looking back, it also showed that worrying about these things, even when they do come true, helps very little when it actually happens. I was nonetheless crippled by the full weight of a decaying world. When I think back to this time, the first few months, I feel a strange nostalgia. It wasn't a particularly happy time, but it was extremely unique. It was the introduction of a feeling that we are now quite accustomed to, that we live in a world that will never be the same. The weeks leading up to it, a trip to Toronto to visit a friend, the last in-class exam I took, and going to a bar, all feel like the best days of my life, the moments before death. There's so much detail in those memories, resolution that would be absent if this simply didn't happen. The second half was a sober return home. Seeing my family again and enjoying the space of a small town sitting in the Rockies felt like bliss. Before I would have dreaded the return, the banality of childhood spaces. I would dread the confrontation with those aspects of my past that I could never fully accept. More plainly, I was missing out on the fun of Montreal and doing things that people my age normally do. But this time spent at home felt like a journey of significant growth. I'm not sure if it was the rekindled friendship with my brother, characterized by the outdoors and working out, my equally rekindled love of basketball, or slowly arriving at the point in which I don't feel like I take my family for granted. Whatever the case, this second half of the pandemic left me with a sense of peace and growth. To take a break and one last time revisit memories of deer, falling snow, running creeks, and late-night fires was likely therapeutic. If the first half was a period of the present becoming a peculiar past, this second half was my past for one last time becoming present. It was stability in the storm, a stability that I could finally accept would also one day drift away. I feel like I've grown somewhat during the pandemic. Perhaps I'm far more politically incoherent or radical. Perhaps I'm more socially withdrawn and less willing to sink my teeth into a world of boundless opportunity. And this is all kind of secondary. The event of the pandemic offered an opportunity to accept and embrace the finality and instability of all things, and appreciate that which is while you still have it. This wasn't something that I'd learn in a lecture, and it's not something that'll help me figure out my career, but I do feel that it will help me find my way home, wherever that may be.